Hello guys, this is part 53 of SQL Server. In this session, we will learn about second normal form, also commonly refers to as 2NF, and third normal form, which is commonly refers to 3NF. Before continuing with this session, I strongly recommend to watch part 52 of this video series, where we have covered the basics of normalization and the first normal form. So, when do we say a table is in second normal form? A table is said to be in second normal form if the table meets all the conditions of first normal form. So the table has to be already in the first normal form, and then the table should not contain any redundant data. So if the table contain any redundant data, move that redundant data to a separate table. And then establish a relationship between the two tables. Using foreign key. So let's understand this. Let's see a table that is not in the second normal form. Let's see a table that is not in the second normal form, and let's see how to change the design in such a way that those tables meet the rules of second normal form. So if you look at this table I have here, I'm talking about this table. So if you look at this table I have here, which has got employee ID, employee name, gender, salary, and then we also have department name, department head, and department location. Now let's assume in my organization I have 100,000 employees. So obviously in this employee table, I am going to have 100,000 records. But let's say I only have two departments in my organization, IT and HR. Okay, so if you look at the department, if you look at this table, you have employees data. You have employees data and department data. Joined together in a single table. So obviously, since we know that in my organization I only have two departments, and then 100,000 employees. For all the 100,000 employees, this IT and HR, columns should also be repeated. In this sense, you know that there are only two department and department head and department location. Does not change on param employee basis. Even if I have 200,000 employees in my organization, IT department head is going to be John and its location is going to be London. And similarly, HR department head is going to be Mike and the location is going to be Sydney. They are not going on param employee basis. But then since I am storing these three columns, within the employees table, there are 2,000 employees in my organization. I have to repeat those columns for every row. So obviously, what is the problem here? This data is redundant. And we know that because of data redundancy, there are several problems. What are the problem of data redundancy? Obviously, disk space wastage, unnecessarily repeating department name, department head, and department location. Information for every employee that you have in this organization. In a bit, we will see how to break this down into two tables and then reduce this redundancy. But then let's understand the problem of redundancy first. So obviously, disk space wastage and your data could become inconsistent. How? Let's say, for example, I want update IT department head name, and let's say there are 50,000 employees in the IT department. Now I updated the department head name maybe for 45,000 records. In error, I forget to update 5,000 record. So for those 5,000 record, the IT department head will be the old person, whereas for the updated one it will be new person. For example, let's say I changed John to Josh. I changed the John to Josh. Then IT department head, For example, let's say I changed John to Josh. The IT department head, but I forget to change it, in this row and the last row. And when we look at this data, okay, here IT department head is Josh, but here it is John. So is your data consistent? It is not consistent. And why are we in such situation? Because you have duplicated data. Somebody updated few rows, but they forget to update the other rows, which is actually leading to data inconsistency. So redundant data can also lead to data inconsistency. And obviously your DML queries, which include insert, update, and delete statement, could become slow as well. Why? Because there are large number of rows to process. So obviously if there are 100,000 employees, we have 100,000 records to update, as far as the department head and department location are concerned. Okay, but on the other hand, if we move this redundant data into a separate table, let's see how to split that. So that we are doing here, we are splitting this table into two. One is TBL employee, which is going to store employees details, employees informations. The other one is TBL department table, which is going to store department information. So here I have department name, department head, department location, and then to uniquely identify each row, I have a primary key here. Now since I have only two departments within my organization in the TBL department table, it is enough if I store these two rows. It is enough if I store these two rows. And then if you look at this employee table, the regular columns employee ID, employee name, gender, salary are present. Employee ID, name, gender means if you look at this employee table, employee ID, employee name, gender and salary are present. And here also employee ID, name, gender and salary are present. And then we have this additional column. Called department ID, which is nothing but a foreign key. So we are using this column. To establish the relationship between employees and department tables. So if you look at the rules, move redundant data to a separate table. So this department redundant data, we are moving it to a, so this department redundant data, we are moving it to a separate table. Here it is. And then we are creating the relationship between these two tables, using the foreign key. That is the foreign key. So we are satisfying the third rule of the the second normal form. So this table design is now in second normal form. So obviously we don't have a disk space wastage. There. Before this normalization, we were repeating three columns. These three columns. Now we are just repeating one column. Now we are just repeating one column. And we have to do this. We cannot completely eliminate data redundancy. Okay, because if you remove this department ID, column from this employee table, you will not know which employee is belonging to which department. So we need to have some level of redundancy. Okay. So we've broken this. This table. So we've broken this table into two. Moving redundant data into department tables and establishing the relationship between TBL employee and TBL department table using this foreign key. Department ID, using this foreign key, department ID. So now this table design is in second normal form. Obviously we don't have disk space wastage. We are only storing two rows, and your data will not be inconsistent anymore, because if you change the department head name, because if you change the department head name, you will have to do that in this table. You either will do it or you don't do it. It is not now a matter of updating a few rows and not updating the others. And then when you join this department table with this employee table, obviously people who belong to the same department will have the same department head, will have the same department head and same department location. And your DML queries can also be faster because I have just one row to change. I have just one row to change if I have to update this specific department. But whereas in this case, if there are 50,000 employees belonging to IT department, then probably I have 50,000 rows to update. Okay, so our table is in second normal form. Now let's see about third normal form. Let's see about third normal form. So a table is said to be in third normal form if the table meets all the conditions of first normal form and second normal form, and then it does not contain columns or attributes that are not fully dependent upon the primary key. Now when we are talking in terms of table, we call it columns, but when we are talking about entity relationship model, we call them attributes and entities. But here we will talk about columns and table. Okay, so a table is said to be in the third normal form if that table does not contain columns that are not fully dependent upon the primary key. Okay, what do we mean by this? Now if you look at this table here, employees table, I have got employee ID, name, gender, salary, and then there is another column, annual salary, and then department ID. Now department ID except annual salary, all the other, now department ID except annual salary, all the other columns are fully dependent on the on the primary key. This is the primary key. I once again reiterate it. Now department ID except annual salary, all the other columns are fully dependent on the primary key. What do we mean by that? If the primary key changes, let's say instead of 2 here, obviously employee changes, Pam and her gender changes, her salary changes. The annual salary also changes. But then this is not changes. But then this is not changes. But then this is not fully dependent on the primary key. This annual salary is not fully dependent on the primary key. This annual salary column is also dependent on the salary column of the person. For example, if my salary is 5,000 per month, my annual salary is 12 into 5,000 is 60,000. Okay. So okay, 500. I mean to say, if my salary is my salary is 5,000 per month. My annual salary is 12 into 5,000 is 60,000. Okay, so this one is actually dependent on. So this one is actually dependent on salary. Annual salary is dependent on salary. It is also dependent on the employee ID. It is also dependent on the employee ID, but then it is not fully dependent on employee ID. It is also dependent on the salary. Means this annual salary is not fully dependent on employee ID. It is also dependent on salary. Okay. And then if you look at this, is there need to save this annual salary? Is there need at all to save this annual salary? There is no need. It is a computed column. On the fly, if you are a query, you can actually compute the annual salary of an employee. So we don't have to store those columns. You can say computed columns, or in a way you can also tell this column is not fully dependent on the primary key. it is also dependent on the salary, So if they are not fully dependent on the primary keys, so if they are not fully dependent on the primary key, then you can either remove them, or you can move to a separate table. Okay, moving to the separate table, we will talking about that now. We will talking about moving to separate table. We will talking about that now. This is the separate table. So if you look at this second example, so this table is not in third normal form. So this this table means which table? So this table is not in third normal form. This table is not in third normal form. So what you can do to make this table in third normal form is remove that column, that annual salary column. Completely from this table. Because why we can compute annual salary. Now if you look at this table, this again, which has got employee and department detail, Okay, so every employee has got department name. And department head. Now, if you look at this, employee name, gender, salary, and department name, they are dependent on the primary key. Now, if you take one as the employee ID, here is Sam. His gender is male. Salary 4,500, and department is IT, and department head. This is also depends on employee ID. When the employee ID changes, okay, department head is Mike. Okay, so it is also dependent on employee ID. But then it is not fully dependent. Because department head is also dependent on the department name. Department head is also dependent on the department name. Okay. Wherever you have IT, it is going to be John. Wherever you have IT, it is going to be John. Wherever you have HR, it is going to be Mike, the department head. So this department head, it is not fully dependent on employee ID. It is also dependent on department name. Okay, what we can do is move this, the column, this column that are not fully dependent on the primary key into its own table. So here we are breaking this employee. Here we are breaking this employee table into two. So employee table is here. So employee table is here. This is the employee table. And department table. So department name. So department name and department head. And we have given it a primary key. And we have given it a primary key. And then we are using that as a foreign key. And we are using it as a foreign key in this table. So a table is said to be in the third normal form if it does not contain any columns that are not fully dependent upon the primary key. So here annual salary it is not fully dependent on the primary key. It is also dependent on the salary. Similarly, department head, it is not fully dependent on the primary key. It is also dependent on the department name. In the case of annual salary, you can simply get rid of that. In the case of annual salary, you can simply get rid of that because it is a computed column. It can be calculated on the fly. So to bring this table into third normal form, you simply get rid of that column. Whereas if you want to get this table, into third normal form, you remove those columns. That are not fully dependent on the primary key into its own table and establish relationship between them. So basically, the rules for the third normal form are that they should satisfy the condition of the first and second normal form. And it should not contain any columns that are not fully dependent upon the primary key. That's it for today. Have a nice day. Thank you for listening. Have a great day.